My name is Francine. I'm an alcoholic. First, let me ask you a question. Does anybody have an As Bill Sees It, by chance? You know, the AA piece of literature, As Bill Sees It, AA Way of Life? Anybody? Do you have it? Could you bring, oh, you're putting, would you, thank you. Would you bring it up to me, please? Thank you so much. I appreciate that. Okay, all you have to do is ask, I guess. No, now he says no. Get the girl all excited and then, okay, all right. You know, that is the story of my life. They get me all excited and then boom. I want to... Oh, some of you really got that one. Boy, must be a lot of newcomers in this room, or a lot of testosterone. Anyway, I am so grateful to be here. I am so grateful. I want to first thank the committee for this wonderful, loving invitation to be of service. And you know, I want to say I really appreciate Jeffrey as my host. You know, oftentimes when we say yes to service, and for those of us that are involved in service, we know that sometimes service is uncomfortable, sometimes it's not fun, sometimes it's challenging, sometimes it's not, you know, we have to do service with people we don't even like. I mean, how many of you have ever done service with somebody you didn't like? Tell the truth. Yeah, I know. And every now and then, you know, a speaker really, you know, kind of tests the host. And last night, poor Jeffrey was tested. You know, I just want to say thank you. My flight got in really late last night, and Jeffrey was standing there waiting for me, you know, with open AA arms. So I just want to say thank you. Thank you. Thank you. And thanks, Crystal, for letting him borrow your car, which was not, by the way, a chick magnet, I got to tell you. Okay. So, also, you know, I love when I get to speak after a countdown, because there's something magical that takes place in the room when there's a countdown. And I have to tell you, oh my God, thank you. Thank you. You know, there's something really magical that takes place in a room when there's a countdown. I mean, I'm not a night person. I get up at 5 in the morning, so by this time, I'm actually in the bed with pajamas. And yet, you know, when there's a countdown, it's like everything livens up. The room is filled with energy and filled with love, and, you know, it's awesome. It's just really awesome. And I just want to say, if you're new to Alcoholics Anonymous, welcome to the most unbelievable experience of your lives. You know, some of you are sitting here and not listening to me, so just so you don't take that wrong. I mean, the whole AA experience. You know, some of you are probably sitting there with your hands shaking and your palms sweating, and you're saying, yeah, right. You know, it's easy for her to say, you know, this is the best deal going. And all I can say to you is it is. You know, if you become willing a day at a time to do what we suggest, to really do what we suggest, you will find that your lives will take on the kind of shape that you never, ever, ever imagined. I stand before you this evening a walking, talking, breathing example of Alcoholics Anonymous in the flesh. You know, I'm an example of what Alcoholics Anonymous not only can show you or do for you, but what it can show you how to do in your own life. And so if you're newly sober, I'm just saying, please join us. And I pray, whether it's at this meeting or another meeting, the meeting tomorrow, or maybe the meeting this morning or last night, or the meeting next week, I pray that you find something that enables you to keep coming back one day at a time. Oh my God, you ask, and not only do you get one, you get two of them. I got one. You're so sweet. Thank you. Thank you. Oh, God. And they're both boys. I don't know what that means. Both boys. But I must say something, and I know this is going to go against all AA tradition, but I'm going to say it anyway. You know, I love newcomers, and I think newcomers are fabulous. They are truly the lifeblood of Alcoholics Anonymous, but in my opinion, they are not the most important people in the room. For me, the most important people in the room are the ones who've got more time than me. You see, I know how to stay sober for 90 days. I know how to stay sober for a year, for 5 years, for 10 years, for 20 years, for 30 years, for 34 years. What I do not know how to do is stay sober for 35, 52, 47, 37, you know, 30. I don't know how to stay sober that long. So for me, the ones that I am always grateful to see in a meeting are the people with more time than me. Because you see, I know what it takes to stay sober over the long haul and not pick up. The room was filled tonight with a lot of newcomers, as it usually is, and we are grateful that you're here. But you know what? If there was not a single old-timer in the rooms, there would be no AA. There would be no one carrying that torch. So I just want to say thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you to those of you who've paved the way for a wretch like me, you know, and made it possible for a woman who's come from the places I've come from and done the things I've done to be able to stand up tall in Alcoholics Anonymous and say thank you. Thank you. So I am so grateful that you guys are here, and I hope you don't get too tired and too weary, you know, and want to not keep coming back. So thanks for being here. I'm hot, actually, but I'm not stripping, not today, not these days. I'm a female alcoholic, hello. I was in New York a couple of weeks ago to visit my mother. My mom is, I'm from New York originally. I live in the Bay Area, not San Francisco. My home is in Marin County, Mill Valley. And I was in New York the week before last visiting my mom. My mom had her leg amputated about 6 weeks ago. And it was devastating. It is devastating. My mother and I are very, very close, thanks to you. Thanks to you guys. We're very close. And, you know, I was there with her. I was there when she had the surgery. I was there when she woke up. I've been back to New York since. And I made a commitment to show up every month. I've already booked my flights through January to be there for my mother because that's what you have allowed me. That's what you taught me how to do. You taught me how to be a good steward of Alcoholics Anonymous. And that's not about what I say. It's about how my feet move. And my feet move today in the direction of being a really good daughter. So anyway, I was visiting my mom, and I was staying at a hotel down on 54th and 7th Avenue. Anybody ever been to New York? So if you've been to New York, those of you who've been there like 20 years ago, and if you've been back, let's say, in the last 15 years, you've probably seen a change in the Times Square area. I grew up there, so I remember when Times Square was really, really raunchy. And, you know, I was in this hotel on 54th and 7th, and they've cleaned up Times Square a lot. You know, they've got some fancy hotels, they've got some 5-star restaurants, some trendy night spots, some pretty chic galleries. But even with the facelift, Times Square is still Times Square. It still has that underbelly of seediness that no matter how you clean it up, it is still Times Square. So on this particular night, I was coming home back to the hotel from the subway, and I was walking toward the corner, and I noticed there was a woman standing right on the corner with a pair of, with a pair of Hoochie Mama fire engine red pants that were so tight, it looked like somebody took a paintbrush and just painted red onto her skin. And she was wearing a blouse that was so sheer, you wonder why she even had a blouse on to begin with. And she's standing on the corner doing a pose. And I noticed there were a couple of women who had walked ahead of me. They were walking toward her. And I could tell they were not from New York, because anybody from New York would not have blinked an eye at women looking like that. I mean, that's like a daily occurrence. But these women obviously were tourists, because I noticed they kind of pointed at her and snickered and sneered. They gave her a look. Some of you know the kind of look I'm talking about. The kind of look we give to someone when we think their station in life is beneath ours. I mean, I've received a look like that more than once in my life, where someone's looked down on me. And sadly, I have to also tell you, I've been one to give a look like that. You know, it hasn't happened in a long time. In all honesty, I don't give looks like that anymore. But I have. I have. So anyway, as I got closer to her, I just looked up and smiled and said hello. Not for any particular reason other than she was literally standing right next to me. But you know, I also smiled and said hello to her because I thought I knew her. No, I didn't know her. But in fact, I knew who she was. You see, 34 years ago, that was me, standing on that same street corner of 54th and 7th, selling everything I thought I had of value. I'd become one more statistic, one more casualty in a life very, very poorly lived. And you know, It took me many years in Alcoholics Anonymous to be able to stand up on the platform and be so honest, so candid, not blinking an eye, and tell you that I come from a place of being an ex-hooker with a criminal record. And the reason I can tell you is for two reasons. Number one, because I happen to believe that no matter how we look today, most of us, or a good portion of us, have come from a place where we are filled with shame. Your shame might not be the same as mine. You might have done something in your life that you regretted, or something that you wish you had not done, or something you wish you had done that you neglected to do. Or maybe you allowed someone to do something to you that, you vowed you'd go to your grave before you ever shared that experience with anyone. I believe most of us come in here with some kind of shame, and how can we not? If you're a real deal alcoholic, you've often done things that you wish you hadn't done. So I believe every time someone like me has the courage to get up on the platform and tell the truth about where I've come from, I believe I give someone like you, and you permission to do the same thing. Because that's how we survive, by having the courage to tell the truth about where we've come from, share our experience, strength, and hope, so that somebody else might identify. Every time I have the courage to do that, I believe I give others permission to do the same. The other reason I'm able to get up here and tell you about my life that easily, that candidly, is because, quite honestly, I don't behave that way anymore. You see, if I was still doing the same things I was doing 34 years ago, I wouldn't be able to stand up here with a straight face and tell you the 12 steps work for me, and I'm still hooking or sleeping with somebody else's husband or doing whatever it was I used to do. And so today I can tell you that because that's not who I am. And I'm not that person anymore. I'm not the person who crawled into Alcoholics Anonymous on July 26, 1979 because of you. That's the gift. That's the gift, that's the good news, and that's the bad news, because with that comes work. With it comes lots of work. And it took me many, many years to get to a place in my recovery where I was willing to do the work. I was born 60 years ago in Atlanta, Georgia. And I have to tell you, it's hard to say 34 years. Sometimes I'm a little amazed that I'm actually 34 years sober, but it's really hard to say 60 years old. When I turned 60 this year, I actually choked. It was so hard. 30 was nothing. I was 30 when I was 4 years sober when I was 30. I was 40. 40 was a breeze. 50 rocked. But somehow when I turned 60, that number made me think of my grandmother. I don't know. I loved her, but my grandmother was old. To me, she was old at 60. But 60 looks different today, I guess. Thank God, thank God. But anyway, I was born in Atlanta, Georgia, and I don't remember an awful lot about those early days in my life. And I'm not one of those people who can get up here and just rattle off all the things I did when I was 3. I don't have a clue what I did yesterday unless I'm looking at my date book. And I don't know if that's because I'm 60 or what, but I don't remember. But what I do remember about those early days of my life is that, even as a kid, I remember my body ached, my spirit hurt, my soul longed to be somebody other than who I was. That I remember. I remember I was a really unhappy kid. Really unhappy. I just, being inside of this skin, being inside of this body was a painful place to be, even for a small child. I hated being black. I hated being a girl. I hated being a Southerner, and I hated being poor. I hated everything about me. I remember, oftentimes I'll hear speakers get up on a platform, and they'll say, oh, I was poor, but I never really knew it. Well, I got to tell you, that was so not my experience. I grew up poor, and I absolutely knew every day. I had an intimate relationship with powdered milk, powdered eggs. It was horrible. Growing up in the South Bronx, it was horrible. We had rats and roaches that ran around the house, and I remember there were, days we'd open up the cupboard, and just roaches would pour out. That's what I grew up with, and I did not like it one bit. Not one bit. But you know what? As much as I hated being poor, I hated being black. I was born in the 50s and raised in the South in the 60s, and I used to pray to a God I didn't even believe in to help me, just change who I was. I would use razor blades to scrape off my skin, and I'd use bleaching cream to try to take off my color because I couldn't stomach living in this body. There was a wonderful television movie that came out in 1989. The movie was called Separate But Equal, and some of you might remember it. It was about the former Supreme Court Justice Thurgood Marshall's effort to create change in this country. And in this movie, they were trying to understand the impact of segregation on small children. They were trying to understand the impact of segregation on a child's self-esteem. And so they brought all these kids together into a control group setting. They had little black kids, little white kids, little girls, little boys. They brought them all together, and they just asked them a battery of questions. There weren't any trick questions. They just asked them some questions. And I remember almost like it was yesterday, and I was 10 years sober when I saw this movie for the first time. They came to this little girl who, by almost anybody's standard of what was cute, she was it. She was so adorable. She had the little black girl, she had long pigtails with big bubble bangs, and she had these little freckles on her face. And she was, oh my God, she was so adorable. And she couldn't have been more than 13. Honestly, I think that's stretching it. She was probably 10, 11 years old. She was adorable. And I remember they came to her and asked her a question. And in responding to the question, she had to select one of 4 dolls that were sitting in front of her. There was a little black boy doll, a little white boy doll, a little black girl doll, and a little white girl doll. And they simply asked her to pick out the ugliest doll of the 4. Wasn't a trick question. Pick out the ugliest doll. You've got 4 in front of you. Pick out the ugliest doll. And I got to tell you, without blinking her eye, without hesitating for a moment, she didn't pick the doll that looked like you. She didn't pick the doll that looked like you. She didn't pick the doll that looked like you. Instead, she grabbed a hold of the doll that looked exactly like herself, because to her, that was the ugliest person she knew. This kid was a kid. She was barely out of diapers, and she had that kind of self-loathing inside. That's how I felt. And you know what? At 10 years sober, when I saw that movie for the first time, it took me back to those feelings of self-loathing like that. It took me back to that place of hating who I was in a hot minute. And I hated it. I hated being who I was. And you know, if there was anybody paying attention to me when I was a kid, if there was anyone who was sensitive to the pain of children, they probably knew that at some point I was going to find a way out of that gnawing pain. And my earliest escape in life, long before drugs and alcohol ever were in the picture, my earliest escape came through books and movies. I loved books, and I loved movies. My mom she used to be a librarian. And in our house, in every room, on every wall, there were reams and reams and reams of books. It was awesome. I mean, sometimes I'd take a book off the shelf and I'd sit in the corner all by myself and, you know, I just started reading. And I think my mother probably thought I was trying to become a smart kid. But you know what was happening? When I opened up that book, between those binders was magic. It was magic. All of a sudden, when I opened up a book, I was like Cinderella going to the ball. It was so sweet. It was wonderful. And I loved old movies, although I must say that today they may seem like old movies, but when I was growing up, they weren't. You know, I loved women like Betty Davis and Barbara Stanwyck and Susan Hayward and, you know, and Joan Crawford. God, I love those women. There were women who had a cigarette in one hand and they have a glass in the other. They didn't take a whole lot of garbage off anybody. And I love them. I love those women. Because you see, when I watched them in the movies, all of a sudden, again, I was like Cinderella going to the ball. I was them. For a moment in time, I was taken out of that self-loathing place, and I became one of those girls. And I learned a lot about being a female from watching those women in the movies. You know, I learned how to smoke my cigarettes. I don't smoke anymore. I haven't had a cigarette for like 31 years. But I learned how to smoke. I smoked for 16 years, and I smoked 3 packs of cool filters a day, the kind that perforate your lungs, because cigarettes go well with booze, cigarettes go well with heroin, cigarettes go well with anything. And I'd be puffing and choking. I'd stand in the mirror, and I learned how to smoke. I'd be puffing and choking. You know, I learned how to smoke by watching Betty Davis in All About Eve. Anybody remember that? Oh, my God. She's at this party that she's having at her house, and she's walking up that staircase with that long, sexy cigarette holder, talking about it's going to be a bumpy ride. Had she only known how bumpy the ride was to become. I mean, because of her, it's her fault. I'd stand in the mirror, and I'd puff and choke. I mean, I learned how to smoke. I was a really good little, substance abuser. I learned how to do it well. And I just kept doing it until I learned how to do it well. And 16 years later, I'm surprised I can even breathe. I really am surprised I can breathe. But I learned how to smoke by watching her. I learned how to hold my glass with my pinky stuck out, and I still have a tendency to do that. I learned how to do that by watching Susan Hayward in Backstreet. Now, Backstreet was one of my favorite movies, and Susan Hayward was one of my favorite movie stars, and I learned a few other tricks of the trade by watching her in Backstreet. If you remember that movie, the essence of the movie is that she's having an illicit affair with somebody else's husband. Well, I'm not proud of my history, but I learned how to sleep with other people's husbands by watching her and every soap opera on television. I mean, how could you not? These were the role models that you have when you're growing up. Sadly, this is what I learned, and so I learned how to do these things. And the books and the movies worked for a long time. I have to tell you, the books and movies took me to a place that was just so sweet for a long time until they stopped working. And like every single one of us that's sober a long time in this room knows, at some point, anything that we use outside of ourselves to try to take away the pain, it simply stops working. It just doesn't. It may work temporarily, or it may seem like it's working temporarily. But anytime we use something outside of ourselves to fill the hole inside of ourselves, it doesn't work. And it doesn't work. And so, the books and movies eventually stop working. And I can't stand up here and tell you that I then decided I was going to run right out and start drinking. But I do believe that on some level, some cellular level, my soul knew I needed something to fill that hole because I couldn't do it on my own. I needed something outside of me to fill that space inside that was so huge. And you take a kid like me who's unhappy and hates who she is, and you take, me being a product of the 60s, and you put it together, and, you have somebody who uses chemicals, better living through chemistry. That was the way it was. I used chemicals to come up. I used chemicals to come down. I used chemicals to level me off. I couldn't stop drinking and using drugs. I just couldn't stop drinking. Sometimes I think to myself, had I had a crystal ball and been able to look down the road at where I was going, I believe for myself, and again, this is my story, my experience, my belief. I believe had I been able to see where I was headed before I picked up, for me, I would have never, ever picked up the first drug or glass. I wouldn't have. I believe for myself, had I known where I was going, where I was to be as a woman alcoholic, there is no way in the world I would have said yes and walked into the lion's den. Instead, what would have happened to me, or for me, would have been what unfortunately happens with many a young person today. I would have found the courage to take my life. Because there is no way in the world I would have wanted to consciously do the things and be treated in the way I was to be treated and lived for the next 12, 14 years. There's no way I would have said yes to that. But you see, I believe that, when you're in the midst of that, you don't have a choice. I didn't have a choice in that moment, and I didn't know. I didn't know any better. And what I also believe is that had I taken my life 34 years ago, I would have killed the wrong person. I really do believe that. But I also believe that I couldn't have been here tonight for the one person in this room who needed to see in the flesh how you get from point A to point C through the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous. You see, I believe my story's not for most of you. Most of you will be bored. It's like you can't wait till I'm down. It's okay. Down off the stage, that is. Yeah, let's clarify. But I believe that there is one person in this room tonight who is divinely inspired to be here, and it might be a newcomer and it might be someone with time. But I believe there's somebody whose soul aches so badly that they need to be reminded of the simple, basic, old-school AA tools that you don't drink, and you go to meetings. You don't drink, you go to meetings, and you stay smack dab in the middle of Alcoholics Anonymous, and your life changes. I believe there's one person here who needed to hear that tonight, and they needed to hear it from me in only the way that I could say it. That's why I didn't take my life 34 years ago. And I'm so grateful for that. So grateful. I was first introduced to Alcoholics Anonymous in 1978, but you know what? I was just too young. I was too young. I mean, I didn't even believe you could be an alcoholic and be young. Just like I didn't believe you could be an alcoholic and be a female. I mean, my idea of an alcoholic was that old man on the Bowery. I don't know if you have something similar to that here. Probably not. This is too pretty a community. In the Bowery. The Bowery in New York is more like the Tenderloin in San Francisco. You know, my idea of an alcoholic was that old man in the Bowery with an overcoat and the bottle hanging out of the back of his pocket with red veins popping out of his face. That was an alcoholic. And if by chance it was a woman, if it was a female, well, of course, it was Susan Hayward. And I'll Cry Tomorrow, where she's digging out of the garbage can trying to get the last drop of booze in the corner. I mean, you know, it's so interesting how alcoholics conveniently forget when we do things like that. I used to do that. I used to go in the garbage can and try to find the last drop of booze in the corner. I used to go in the garbage can when I used to smoke, and some of you might not want to admit it, but I used to go in the garbage can and take the butt that was all the way down to the filter. I'd put it up to my lips, burning my lips, trying to get the last puff. That's how sick and pathetic I was. But I thought, when I saw Susan Hayward doing it, it's like, oh my gosh, she's an alcoholic. Or, if there was a woman alcoholic, it was Lee Remick. In Days of Wine and Roses, of course, she's an alcoholic, hiding booze in the greenhouse. I didn't even have a greenhouse. How could I be an alcoholic? You know, that's my thinking, a greenhouse? I live in an apartment. I don't have a greenhouse. Alcoholism is so insidious. It tells us we do not have a disease. It's the only disease that tells us we don't have a disease. And it tricks us into believing that garbage, for sure. Anyway, I was introduced in 1978, but I couldn't stop drinking. But I did go to meetings. I went to a couple of meetings in New York. But I used to hide booze in my purse, and I'd come to the meeting, and I'd go into the bathroom, and I'd have a few sips. And I just knew nobody knew that I was drinking. I knew that because it was vodka, so of course you can't smell vodka. You know, somebody told me that lie. I don't know who it was, but it's a lie. And so let me just say, I have never in my life been to an AA meeting where there is not at least one person on something. I have never, ever gone to an AA meeting where there is not one person on something. So if you happen to be that one person, and you have just gone and taken a swig or shot up or whatever, and you think we can't tell, I'll tell you, there's a distinction between dilated and constricted pupils, and contrary to popular belief, you can, in fact, smell vodka through the pores. You really can. So if you're here and you're using, I am so grateful you're here. I just want to say that. I am so grateful you're here. But if you're here and you think we don't know, surprise, we do. Most of us have been there and done that, you know, and I was one of those people that used to just think nobody knew, but they did. They all knew. But you know what? Something happened then. I didn't stop drinking, but Alcoholics Anonymous made a dent in my life, in my soul. But I continued to drink, and then I did what I learned in AA is a geographic. And if you're new and you don't know what a geographic means, simply it means if you go from point A to point C, you probably think you're leaving all your baggage back at point A, right? Yeah, I know, because I've been there. That's what I thought. I thought when I left New York City in 1978 at the end end of 78, I thought I was leaving all my baggage in New York because New York was the cause of my problems. You know, those men, they forced me to take all that money. I swear I would have never taken all that money. My mother didn't birth me the right way. It was her fault. New York, it was New York's fault. It was just too busy, the city, too busy. You know, and so I just knew I left that stuff back in New York when I moved to Las Vegas. Like, go figure. Only an alcoholic would even think like that. I moved from the frying pan into the fire, from New York to Las Vegas, Nevada, which is where I got sober. And so I just want to say that if you're someone who wonders how in the world can you get sober in Vegas, I'll just say when your number is up, wherever you are lucky enough to be, God bless you. And I was lucky enough to be in Vegas. I was lucky enough to be in a town that had a lot of meetings, and it had to, because there was so much booze around and it was so plentiful. I moved out to Vegas in 1978, and it took from 1978 until June of 1979 to July for me to get sober. But in June, I got hit by a car in a blackout. And the last thing I remember was I was sitting in a discotheque. We used to have those. Discotheque that was appropriately named the Brewery. And the next thing I remember was I came to in Desert Springs Hospital with my entire body in traction, and my left leg was in a cast all the way up my thigh. And I don't even have a clue how I got there. You know, even today, over the years, I've kind of tried to piece together what happened, and I'm actually incapable of separating the real from the unreal. I have no clue what happened. But what I was told by the police that found my body and by the doctors that pieced me back together again, what I was told is when they found me, they didn't think I was going to live. And when they realized I would live, they never thought I'd ever walk again, because when they found me, my left leg came up behind my head and the bone had come straight through. And you know, I don't hide it. I have a 10-inch scar on my leg with a lot of hole marks and a big mark where the bone came right through. And you know, over the years, I've had people ask me, have you ever thought about cosmetic surgery? Because it is such an ugly scar. And I don't hide it. I wear skirts, I wear shorts, I wear bathing suits. And for the last 34 years, I've chosen not to cover it up. You know, maybe next year I'll have surgery on it, because it really is an ugly leg. But you know what? The reality for me is every time I look at this leg, I'm reminded of the very high price I had to pay to stand before you right now, right here and right now. Every time I look at my leg, I'm reminded of every drink I had, of every drug I ever put into my body, and of every inappropriate act as a woman I have ever performed. That's what I'm reminded of when I look at my leg. And so just for today, I choose not to cover it up. But I'd like to say that that broken leg was enough to get me sober. You know, I'd really love to tell you that that leg did it and I just ran right out and got sober. But for any of you that are real deal alcoholics in here, you know that no mere car accident is going to stop you if you're on a mission. And it didn't stop me. I continued to drink for another month and a half, and then something happened. You know, I like to think of it as that moment of clarity, that act of providence that the first step talks about. You know, something happened, and I must tell you that my last drunk was not my worst. It was not my worst. My last drunk was like not even a big to-do. But it was the thing that did it for me. My last drunk. I haven't had a drink or a drug since July 26, 1979. And I can't even believe it. Someone like me gets to stand before you with this much sobriety. I know I'm old, but sometimes I look at myself and I think, no, you really are. It's only because when I don't have my glasses on, I really can't see. So I think I'm still young, and my husband reminds me, he says, all the things you're doing, do you still think you're 30? You know, sometimes. I came into Alcoholics Anonymous with nothing short of a bad attitude. Nothing short. I came into the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous with my broken leg, and I sat in the back of the rooms in what I endearingly like to call the inventory section. That was my favorite section. And I'd sit back there and I'd take up 3 seats. I'd have a seat for my bottom. Okay, we understand that. I'd have a seat for my broken leg. I understand that. But I had a seat for my crutches. I mean, honestly, a bad attitude or what? 3 seats, and I'd sit in the back and I'd have my arms crossed, and I would dare you to make my day. I would dare you to say something that made me want to keep coming back. And, you know, I didn't like anybody. I didn't like men. I hated women. That doesn't leave a whole lot of people in between. It's like, I didn't like anybody. I couldn't stand anybody. And, you know, it's interesting, what goes around comes around. I especially didn't like women, especially. And what I discovered many years later was I didn't like women because I hated myself. You know, I was jealous of most women, and the others just irritated me. So I just didn't like women. And then I'd look at these women that would get up on the platform and they'd talk about taking the black words off the white page in the big blue book and how their lives have changed. And I thought, oh my God, who do they think they are? You know, they talk about change, behavior change. I mean, that was like so far removed from anything I had ever thought about. And I hated those women because I didn't mind the women who were like me, the ones who slept with other people's husbands, the ones who wore hot pants to meetings, the ones who wore see-through blouses. I didn't mind them because how could they judge me? I didn't like the ones who were taking the black words off the white page in the big blue book and putting it into practice. Those are the women I didn't like. And you know, that's exactly what I found in a sponsor. I hated my sponsor. I hated Louise. You know, one of the single most important people that ever graced my life was Louise R. And she's now up in that big AA meeting in the sky. She died with about 44, 45 years of continuous recovery. I hated her so much. And you know why I hated her? Because she was the first person who had the courage to tell me the truth about my behavior. See, that's why I didn't like her. She wasn't one of those pantsy sponsors who said, honey, you just don't drink. You're fine, just like you are. You're okay. She said, no. You know, I used to hear in meetings how, I used to hear some old timers say that all we have to do is just not drink, and that's it. And Louise really didn't believe that. And she was a big book baby. That's why thank you so much again for whoever it was that brought this to me. I usually carry mine, and I realized I left it home. Louise believed that all the answers were in the books, and so I got indoctrinated with all of the AA literature very, very early in my recovery. And she had me read this whenever I would question whether this was just about not drinking. This is what Bill W. had to say. I didn't make it up. Bill W. wrote this. It's on the very first page of As Bill Sees It, and this is conference-approved literature, just in case there are any AA purists in the room. On the very first page it says, it has often been said of AA that we are interested only in alcoholism. That is not true. We have to get over drinking in order to stay alive. But anyone who knows the alcoholic personality by first-hand contact knows that no true alkie ever stops drinking permanently without undergoing a profound personality change. Not a little personality change, not one when you feel like it, that those who get to stay around here over the long haul change the way they were when they came, change the people who came into Alcoholics Anonymous. I'm not the same person I was when I got here. And I'm so grateful I had a sponsor who believed that behavior was key to long-term sobriety. She believed that there was a connection between self-esteem and recovery. She believed that how I behaved and how I felt about myself would determine how whether I stayed sober. And there were several behaviors she talked to me about, and I'd like to share with you 3 things that were significant for me. And again, this is my story. It's not personal to anyone else. These are 3 things that Louise knew I needed to clean up, and so that's what I had to do. The first behavior change was, I said to you, I had this nasty little habit of sleeping with other people's husbands. You know, I thought that was quite acceptable because my attitude was, it is not my fault that he can't keep his pants zipped up. What am I supposed to do? I remember saying to her one day, what happens if the guy is walking down the street holding onto his honey and giving me the eye? What should I do? And she said the stupidest thing, and even today I think it's stupid. She said, turn your head. I'm thinking, why should I be so inconvenienced? Why do I have to be the one? It's like that was just not fair. But you know, fair or not, I don't sleep with other people's husbands. And I haven't for a very, very, very long time. Neither do I sleep with anybody's boyfriend. I put them in the same category. You know, today I have enough to deal with my own husband. My God, 2 would be a little too much. 1's enough. One day at a time, there's not one single woman in this room or any room who would ever have to worry about me being in the same room with her man. That might not mean a lot to some of you in here, but to me it does. Because to me it's about taking the black words off the white page in the big blue book and putting into practice working the 12 steps. It's easy to talk about the steps. It's another to really put them into practice. And today I have smart feet, and that's because of what Louise taught me. The next esteemable act, and that's what it boiled down for me, she used to say that self-esteem comes from doing esteemable acts. Not feeling, not thinking, but doing. The next one was, for me, I needed to change the way I dressed. Again, that woman on the street corner of 54th and 7th, oh God, she used to wear she had these long red pants on. I used to wear hot pants. Even when they weren't fashionable, I used to wear hot pants to AA meetings. I was about half the size, but still my cheeks would be hanging out, not my facial cheeks. And I'd be, you know, hot pants are about the size of a sash, about 6 inches. And I'd be wearing these little hot pants in meetings, and I'd be wearing my little scarf, because that's about what it amounted to. I remember a few years ago, remember Jennifer Lopez? They had that big to-do about her at the Grammys. She was wearing those 2 strips of fabric. She had nothing over on me. I'd be in AA meetings dressed like that with my little hot pants and my little strips, and I'd have my heels with the big taps. Now, I don't wear them anymore, and even now, if I'm walking on a floor like this, I'm very mindful if a meeting's going on so as not to make noise. But when I was new with my hot pants and my strips, I'd walk, not in the back, I'd come in late, and I'd walk across the front of the room. You couldn't help but notice me, even if you didn't want to notice me, you did, because I wanted you to notice me. You know, Louise helped me realize that how I dressed and how I carried myself was really all about how I hated myself. You see, any attention was better than no attention. That's the place I came from. I just wanted you to pay me attention because the hole was so deep. It was so big. I needed attention. The third thing that she taught me, which was a significant change for me, and again, this is just for me because I know I am truly in the minority here, but whatever. When I got sober, I had a filthy mouth. A filthy, filthy mouth. Every other word out of my mouth was a 4-letter word, and you know what? You would have thought I didn't know any other words, and perhaps I didn't. I don't know. But every other word out of my mouth was a 4-letter word. And you know, I thought that was acceptable because everybody else was doing it. And Louise helped me understand that every time I cursed, I took the focus off of my message and put the focus on me as a messenger. When I was a newcomer, I had a messy message. So I didn't care that you weren't listening to me. But quite honestly, today I don't want you to get distracted by curse words. So I choose not to curse. I choose not to. She taught me that it was an esteemable act, that I learned to come up with other words to describe how I feel. I know that's again, I appreciate that I'm in the minority, but that's how I am today. I just choose not to curse. She taught me also that every time I cursed in a meeting, people laughed. And again, it went back to that insecurity that I just needed you to pay attention to me. And if I got up on the platform or somewhere and I used a lot of curse words and you laughed, then that was wonderful. And I notice even today, if I'm in a meeting, someone could be going along and then as soon as I use a curse word, everybody bursts into tears, laughter, tears. I burst into tears. Everybody else bursts into laughter, you know. But she taught me that it was an estimable act. A day at a time I could choose to use different words. I learned how to use different words in Alcoholics Anonymous because of reading the big book in the 12 and 12. I actually needed to have a dictionary to understand half the words that were in there. Words like vicissitude and rapacious. You know, I often hear people say that the big book and the 12 and 12 are written for elementary school kids, not the books I was reading. I mean, I'd never heard of the word rapacious. I had never heard of the word vicissitude. I learned those words in AA, and I learned them by having a dictionary next to me. As my outsides were changing, my insides were also changing, and when I was 2 years sober, I made a decision to go back to school. That was a major deal because, again, I'm a high school dropout. I'm an ex-hooker with a criminal record. And you see, women like me don't get to do anything in life. Even if you wouldn't let me do anything, this mask between my ears says I'm not good enough. So why even try? This mask between my ears says, what's the use? What's the use? It's not going to work out anyway. You'll never get to that place you want to be. And maybe I wouldn't have. You know, maybe I wouldn't have. But I had a sponsor who believed that anything was possible if I was willing to do the work. And it's a good thing because she was the only one that really believed in me at the time. I had a difficult time understanding that you can't go to hardware stores looking for oranges. I used to go to people who themselves were stuck in fear, and I would expect them to encourage me out of my fear. And they couldn't. They couldn't. They may have wanted to, but they couldn't. I would go to them asking them to support me and to help me get through this and just walk me through it, and they couldn't because so many of them were living in situations they hated. They were in relationships they couldn't stand, and they were in jobs they hated. How could they encourage me to do something different? But Louise kept saying you can do anything you want if you are willing to do the work. And so when I was 2 years sober, I made a decision to go back to school. I got my GED when I was still living in Las Vegas, and I used to hide my GED book under the bed because I was so ashamed that somebody would see it. And I lived alone. So who was I ashamed? I mean, I don't know. I used to hide the book anyway. But I studied it because that's what you taught me in AA. You taught me to have smart feet no matter what I was doing. And I started college in Nevada. And then I moved back to New York City because what I wanted to do with my life, I couldn't do it in Vegas. And so I moved back to New York in 1982, and I worked my way through school. I worked full-time, I went to school full-time, and I went to meetings of Alcoholics Anonymous every single day. And it's important that I tell you, especially the part about going to meetings every day, no matter what I was doing, because I come across so many newcomers today between those delicate years of 1 and 5 who are all back in life. They all have the perfect relationship, they're back in school, they have the right job, they just don't have time to go to meetings. And when they do have time, maybe once a month, they come into the meetings and they share, and they share, and they share, and they share everything that's been built up over a month's period. And while AA, I suspect, works under those conditions, I had a sponsor who believed it worked better if you went on a regular basis. And so whether I wanted to or not, I went to meetings constantly. Constantly. Up until I was 20 years sober, I went to at least one meeting every single day. And now, for the most part, I still go at least to 5, 7, 8 meetings a week. I still go to a lot of meetings because that's where you are my nourishment. You are my nourishment. And it doesn't matter where I am, no matter what part of the world, I find an AA meeting. I'm one of those people, my sponsees can never say to me, I can't find a meeting in London or Cape Town or somewhere. It's like, you cannot tell me that. Because I've been to meetings all over, and I know all you have to do is go onto the internet and look up a meeting in any country, and you're there. I went to meetings, and I worked my way through school. And then in 1986, I left New York and moved down to Washington, D.C. to complete my education. And in 1989, I finished my education and moved back to New York City, having graduated from one of the top law schools in this country. And I can tell you that it might not mean much to you guys sitting out there, but for a kid like me, who used to pay lawyers a fortune to keep her out of jail, the fact that I stand before you able to practice law anywhere is truly a gift from God. Truly a gift from God. I want to share a story with you. It's interesting. When I first got sober, when I first started practicing law in New York, I was doing some criminal law at the time, and I remember I had a client in criminal court, 100 Center Street, and the judge had said, "Will the defendant please stand?" And I stood. Oh my God. The only thing that was a saving grace for me is that sometimes a lawyer will stand up with their client, but I couldn't believe I did that. I had a criminal client, and I stood up when they said, "Will the defendant please stand?" It's like, oh my God. Anyway, you get through all kinds of things in recovery. I did not become a lawyer right away, and it's also important that I tell you this, because sometimes you'll hear people, they'll say, "Oh yes, I got sober and everything was just perfect, and da-da-da, I ran off into Alice in Wonderland or somewhere." And you know, my story, anybody who's ever heard my story, there have been lots of challenges along the way, and before I became a lawyer, I failed the bar many times. Many times. And you know what? When I was failing the bar many times were the times when I was speaking the most in Alcoholics Anonymous. I don't speak so much anymore, maybe about 10 times a year now, but I used to speak every single weekend for about 17 or 18 years. And it was mostly around that time when I kept failing the exam. You know, it took me 3 tries before I passed the New York bar. John F. Kennedy Jr. and I failed together. And the only difference is poor John's face was splattered all over the Daily News, and mine was just splattered all over AA. And you know, you guys lifted me up and you carried me to the next place. And, you know, I eventually was admitted to the New York bar. And then I decided I wanted to move to California. And, you know, one would think that after failing so many times that you know how to take tests. But I'm not a test taker, and I never have been. And I'll just tell you this, that I stopped counting how many times I failed the California bar at 6. I stopped counting. I can also tell you today that I am admitted to the 2 most difficult bars in the country, that are New York and California, and the 3rd largest bar, the Washington, D.C. bar. And that's because of you, because I didn't give up. You know, one of those people that when I was drinking, I used to think the dreams were for other people. And I hated people who went for their dreams. I was really jealous of them, is what it was. I was really jealous of women who had things, mostly women. You know, I was just so envious of other people. And when I got sober, my sponsor said, "You can do anything you want. You just have to be willing to do the work." The operative word is the work. And when I became willing to do the work, my life changed. Not only did my insides change, my outsides changed. You know, when I was newly sober, I was invited to make a list of all the things I wanted out of my sobriety. And on that list, you would have found a litany of every single material thing I lost. You would have found fur coats and diamond rings and kitty cats and stereos. That's what you would have found on that list. And yet today what you'd find on my list is a whole bunch of intangibles that none of you can take away unless I give it up. None of you. You'd find things on my list today like genuine self-esteem. Not the kind that comes from him, which is the way it always was for me. Being attached to the right guy, you know, who was driving the right car, who had the right apartment, who was wearing the right rings, that was self-esteem. Well, today, you know what self-esteem is about for me? Today it's about walking through fear. Every single time I do something that I'm afraid to do, it's like a little check mark next to my name. It's like every time I do anything, you know, somebody asked me, several people asked me before coming up here, "Are you still afraid when you speak?" You betcha. Every time I get up on the platform, I'm afraid. My heart pounds. It takes me an hour to meditate, me and God together, just to get me calm enough to get in here, because I'm about to tell the truth. That's why. Anytime I have to tell the truth, I'm scared, because it's always that little fear inside that they're not going to like you. And you know what? Some of you might not. But what I have today, what I bring to the table today, is a willingness to walk through the fear. You know, I used to think that courage was an absence of fear. Today I know courage is about feeling the fear and doing something anyway. That's how I've developed self-esteem. Every time I've done something I was afraid to do and got to the other side, I felt better about me. What you'd also find in that list today is the gift of God. I was raised a Southern Baptist, and I ostracized God from early on as a kid, because the God of my childhood was the God of hellfire and brimstone. It was that old white man with a long white beard sitting atop a mountain mandating how I should behave. That's what I grew up with. And you know what? That God just was not for me. It was punishing. It was cruel. I remember as a kid, whenever it was thundering and lightning outside, I was told that was God punishing me. And so that's what I grew up with as a child. And so when I got sober, that was the last thing I wanted. And you know what you told me? You said, you develop a God of your understanding. And I believe today that there was a God that brought me to Alcoholics Anonymous, and in Alcoholics Anonymous, you brought me to God. You allowed me to create a God of my understanding. And that God has shifted over the years. You know, it's when I was new, when I started to believe in God, when I was about 7 years, I guess, or 8 years sober, my God was a she, and I made sure every single person knew that, everybody. And then as the time went on, I realized that my God, for me, it's my creator. My God's not a he either. It's not a she and it's not a he. It's my creator. And that's what works for me. But the thing that really works is that I have a God. You don't have to, but for me, it's worked better having something I could rely on. Something that gives me that push, that nudge when I don't want to get out of bed. That's what's on that list today, the gift of God. What you'd also find on that list today is the gift of my mom. You know, I am so grateful for every single woman who hated her mother when I got sober and talked about it. Every woman who complained about their mom, it was wonderful because I didn't feel like such a leper. You know, I felt like just like everybody else. But as I started to take the black words off the white page in the big blue book and put it into practice, I started to gravitate toward the women who did the same thing. The women who didn't hate their mothers and who didn't always make it about their mother's fault, but women who started to change and realize that they played a part in that relationship as well. And as a result, today my mom and I are very close. You know, you have given me my mother. And that doesn't mean that it's always peachy and keen, because I got to tell you, after my mother's surgery, I could tell when she was getting better, because she started to take back control. And, you know, it could be a little tenuous at times, but so what? You know what my sponsor reminds me of? That I'm the one with 34 years of sobriety, not my mother. I'm the one that every time I want to say my mother's not doing this or my mother's not doing that, I'm reminded that I'm the one in sobriety with the 12 steps. My mom is on my list today. And if my mother would have dropped dead right now at this very moment, I'd be really sad. I'd be really hurt. But there is no unfinished business in that relationship. I've been a really good daughter for 31 out of the 34 years I'm sober. For that, I'm so grateful. You'd find my mother on my list. And the last thing you'd find on my list is the gift of love. You know, love is an interesting thing. We often talk about it. We throw it around, say we love each other. But I think love is a verb, you know, like gratitude. Love to me is an action word. It's how do I behave? Do I act like I'm really loving, or do I just talk a great game? Like I said, I didn't like anybody when I got here, and I didn't like people especially who were different from me. I judged you by the 2% of the things that distinguish you from me: race, gender, sexual orientation, political views, religious views. Those are the things that separates me from you, and those are the things I clung to when I was new. If you were different from me, I wanted no part of you. And the only people you saw in my life were people who looked just like me. But you know, you've taught me how to have an open heart. And you've taught me that the proof is in the pudding. See, I'd be hard-pressed to stand up here and tell you that I'm working a spiritual program and everybody in my life looked like me. For me, I'd be hard-pressed to tell you that. And so if you look at who's in my life, you'll see just how I walk. You'll be able to see if I walk like I talk. Because in my life, the women I sponsor are Native American, Asian, white, and Latina. My friends are black, white, Asian, Latina, and Native American. And I take it even more personal if you look in my home. My husband's Jewish, and he's from the Bronx. You know, and the real diversity issue is not even that he's Jewish and from the Bronx. The real issue in our family, the diversity issue, is he's a therapist. Can you imagine a therapist and a lawyer coexisting? It's a little challenging. You know, one of my sponsees calls me the patron saint of women over 40 who was not willing to settle. Because you know what? I was not willing to settle. I'd settled for men all my life. And when it came time to meeting my husband, he is not even the guy that I would have necessarily chosen for myself 34 years ago. He's not the guy. I definitely wouldn't have chosen a therapist. No way. But you know what? I've got one of the good guys. I've got one of the good guys, and how grateful I am for that. It's less exciting than it used to be, but that's because I'm less exciting than I used to be. But that's, you know, sobriety is an amazing thing. It has ups, it has downs. I'm so grateful to be sober. And so in closing, I'd like to read from, as Bill sees it, from my favorite page as I close. Can we choose? It's on page 4. We must never be blinded by the futile philosophy that we are just the hapless victims of our inheritance, of our life experience, and of our surroundings, that these are the sole forces that make our decisions for us. This is not the road to freedom. We have to believe that we can really choose. And that's what you've given me in 34 years of sobriety. You've given me the gift of choice. You've taught me that it doesn't matter where I've come from, doesn't matter what color my skin is, doesn't matter whether I believe in God or I don't. I happen to, but I don't have to. You've taught me that the only thing that matters in the overall scheme of things is what I do with this most precious gift you've given me. And not just what I do in an AA meeting, because it's relatively easy to be nice in AA. Relatively. But you taught me that the real work is out there. The real test of my sobriety is not what I do in here, for me. The real test of my sobriety is how do I take it out into the real world. The 12 step says, practice these principles in all our affairs. That's where the real work is. How do I treat somebody in traffic when they've cut me off? Do I give them the finger and call them some sweet expletives? Especially if they're a different race than me? You know, what do I do on the line in the supermarket when I'm at the line and it says less than 25 and I see somebody with 50 packages? What about when I'm on the line in the bank and the teller's taking his or her time? What about at home? Do I treat my husband like a dog and treat my sponsees like little goddesses? That's where the real work is. For me, the real work is taking the black words off the white page in the big blue book and practicing it out there. And you know, all you've ever asked of me in the years I'm sober, all you have ever asked is that I always be willing to pass it on. And for that, I am grateful. Thank you.